This is Outbreak News This Week, brought to you by the Global Dispatch Incorporated. Outbreak News This Week is your source for all the news about worms and germs. And now, your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com. Here's Robert Harriman.
Good evening, Tampa Bay, and those of you listening online streaming, and I appreciate you listening. My name is Robert, and I welcome you to the show. Now, we all read and heard about the strange and mysterious death of Kim Jong-nam. He's the half-brother of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. He was apparently approached by two women in a Malaysian airport who put something on his face, and he died about 20 minutes later. We now know that the unknown substance was VX nerve agent, a weapon of mass destruction, WMD. Joining me now to talk more about VX nerve agent, the attack on the firstborn illegitimate son of the late leader Kim Jong-il, and what's in North Korea's WMD arsenal is Lawrence Roberge, PhD. Dr. Roberge is a professor at Laboure College in Milton, Massachusetts, and a biodefense and bioterrorism researcher. Dr. Roberge, welcome back to the show, sir.
Hi, Robert. Good to be back with you.
Good to have you. Okay, so we see these reports that Kim Jong-nam, I can't get all these Kims right here, was in Kuala Lumpur airport. He was attacked. He apparently complained that after someone grabbed his face from behind, they splashed some liquid on his face, covered his face with a cloth, laced with the liquid. He started feeling dizzy, and he died, about 20 minutes later on the way to the hospital.
Right.
Malaysian authorities gave a tox report, and they say he was killed by VX.
Right.
Despite North Korea coming out today saying it was a heart attack. Of course, they can't prove that. What is VX nerve agent?
VX nerve agent. Let me just give you a little background here. A nerve agent, most of them focus in on a particular enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. And what that is, if you can think about this, when one nerve communicates with either a muscle or another nerve, it sends a little chemical signal across to activate the target tissue. And by doing that, in this case, it uses a particular neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, and what it does is it binds to a particular receptor, a little protein on the target tissue, which then causes the eventual physiological change. If you're talking skeletal muscles, for example, it could be the muscles to allow you to breathe. Okay, the diaphragm and the muscles that are between the ribs, which we call the intercostals. It could also be something important like communication within the brain, one neuron communicating to another certain information. Now, once you have the acetylcholine going across this little space, communicating with the target tissue, you have to ask yourself, well, what shuts this off? It's like turning a switch on, but when do you turn it off? The chemical acetylcholine is pretty quickly unbinds and can rebind to that particular receptor unless it comes in contact with an enzyme that happens to be present around there called acetylcholinesterase. And what that literally does is it slices the molecule so you get an acetyl group floating away, and the choline part gets actually taken back up by the initial neuron to make more of this neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Now, nerve agents block that enzyme. And it is a serious point because think about it this way. It's as if all your tissues are being turned on but never get a rest. You have the lights on in the building but nobody's home. Everything gets used. Now, this is important when you start talking about, for example, breathing. If I can't shut off or to allow the muscle to relax, I can breathe in, but I can't breathe out. And that usually is one of the symptoms. People have difficulty breathing. They're gasping because the muscles won't fully relax to allow a complete breath. There was a series of nerve agents that were produced by Nazi Germany. They all started with the letter G, but they also had common names, Somans, Sarin, and Tabon. The British started doing some research in a similar fashion in the early 1950s and eventually developed one particular agent that was modified slightly and was called VX. So they were the ones that created the V series of nerve agents. It is not like what you see if you think about the movie The Rock, where the person's face is boiling off and everything else. Nothing happens there. What happens is they start gasping desperately for air. They may go into convulsions. Now remember, I said all of the nerves and all of the tissues that receive signals from these nerves that use acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is not broken down now. It builds up, and it's as if you kept everything turned on. Nothing gets to relax. Nothing has a reversal. And so the person begins to have major problems. They will go into spasms. They will go into seizures. They will gasp and eventually suffocate. Suffocation by basically not being able to get any gas exchange. Now, we do have drugs that will counter this. The drugs have to get into the patient, whether we're talking in a battlefield situation or we're talking in a civilian situation. The drugs have to get to them very, very quickly, because what happens is these nerve agents will eventually bind to the enzyme permanently. They'll make a permanent chemical bond, and then that enzyme is worthless. It gets much harder to reverse the effects and keep the patient alive. I hope that helps, at least for a beginning.
Yeah. Now, and the antidote that you're talking about, is that atropine?
What atropine does is it reduces the effects of the excess of buildup of acetylcholine. There's a drug called pralixamine, depending on which side of the ocean you're on. I think it's also called Pontom for a trade name. The people that were in the Gulf War and since then are familiarized with them. They're two auto-injectors. They're next to each other, and you just basically put them up against your thigh and fire them. And they will inject the pralixamine. They will inject the atropine. The atropine deals with the overabundance of acetylcholine. The pralixamine is actually able to sever the bond of the nerve agent to the enzyme and be able to get the enzyme working again. So the enzyme will then begin to rapidly break down a lot of the excess acetylcholine molecules present. You can't get that drug at your grocery store. Usually they have it in large supplies, not only in the military, but in the 10 basically medical drug warehouses in the event of weapons of mass destruction attack. These are these push packs that they've set up where they've got everything, respirators, drugs, antibiotics, the whole 9 yards. Nobody knows where these places are, by the way. And that's not that they don't exist. It's just they don't want to tell the bad guys, literally, right, hey, this is where all our stuff is if you decide to hit the place with nerve gas or decide to disperse a dirty bomb.
Now, is it fair to say that VX is the most toxic and lethal of the nerve agents? Yeah,
it is. And the reason being is that it is so incredibly powerful at such an incredibly small amount, okay? We're talking about, and it depends if you're talking about breathing it in versus a droplet of it, because it's very capable of being absorbed by the skin. And so the skin, I think, is something like 10 milligrams will kill a full adult. 20 to 30 breathable will kill an adult also. We're talking an exceedingly small droplet, okay? But the big problem is, okay, how did they kill him? Now, I don't want to sound macabre, but everybody's been trying to speculate. Look at how could they do this with themselves not in biodefense suits and all that?
Exactly. That was one of my questions.
Okay, that's a good question, and I'm glad you brought it up. Here's a couple of things that were noticed. For those of your audience that did view the videos, you notice that they came up, did their hands. I think, and I've noticed in some of the readings, to make VX, you can use two reagents, bring them together, and they very quickly convert into VX. What they may have done is not put VX on the women's hands. or on necessarily the rag. Of course, it could have been a combination. VX was found to be attractive in chemical warfare, in part because you could set up what's called a binary weapon. In other words, think of an artillery shell, but inside of it, there's two chambers, each separated by about, it wouldn't be cardboard, more be something like Teflon separator. And when the shell is fired, both isolated chambers now become unisolated. They become mixed as the shell is rotating around, mixing the chemical, and now you've got active VX. That way you don't have to drive down a battlefield with a truckload of these warheads and worry that, oops, one of them starts leaking, it's going to leak nerve agent. They may have had, on left hand, one chemical, right hand, the other, put them close together as soon as they got up to him, and then smeared it on his face. Other option, they had some of it on their hands, one of the reagents, smeared it, then covered him with the supposedly rag that they had also had, and that had the second reagent. That guarantees that A, it's going to go very quickly into his skin, but B, the skin is very close to the brain. So that basically sped up the activity of it working to shut down the brain and kill the patient, or I should say the target person.
Yeah. Now, the fact that the women didn't get affected, gloves wouldn't have stopped it, or would it? I don't think they were wearing gloves, though.
No, they weren't. They weren't wearing gloves, and they were trying to look as touristy as possible. Yeah. One of them had a shirt on that had the LOL, lots of laughs. I think basically... Because
if it touched their skin, though, Dr. Roberge, there's no reason why to suggest they wouldn't have met the same fate as this guy.
Right. No. You're asking a very good question there. And that's what I think. This is where the binary production issue comes into play. I think that basically the women had what I can say is basically one of the two compounds.
Yeah.
And basically applied both of them. And when it came in contact, which would have been on the victim's skin, that's where it turned into VX. That's where it was able to rapidly then get absorbed. And then, of course, you're talking about if they rubbed the rag, let's say the rag had the second agent on its face, you're including the possibility of ocular absorption. You're talking about the possibility some of it could have gotten into the nasal tissues, which are highly vascularized, mouth too. And then all they had to do was just walk away and make sure that they didn't have any, and they were told to go, and they did, immediately wash off. So this stuff, although it has an oily consistency, does have some solubility to it. The other thing was they did not find barely any of it when they did a hazmat check in the area. Most of the compound that was recovered was on the skin of the face. Now, I'm sure they might have been able to do a mass spec study and look for some of the molecules still available or their breakdown products. But, they basically saw a person that just had gone through complete neurological shutdown.
Sure. Could these women have taken atropine prophylactically?
Yeah, but the thing is, it has somewhat negative effects if you take it without having that buildup of acetylcholine.
Gotcha. The
paroxamine will only last so long, and the fact is that if they did the binary approach, they might not ever have needed it. Right. In other words, There were two women, and the way the stories I've seen, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, one came into contact, the second came into contact, and they walked away. Now, if they play stupid, as some of the family members have said, they didn't know what they were doing. They thought they were part of a, almost like candid camera action.
Right.
Maybe they could have been fooled into thinking they were doing some sort of perfume thing because they never really had an active agent. Each one had a binary, one of the binary chemicals necessary to make VX. And so they never knew what they got. If they felt dizzy or anything, it might have been because of one of the agents, because they are somewhat, one of them is a phosphate chemical. But,
well, I wouldn't be surprised because, Kim Jong-un, I wouldn't be surprised if that was his whole plan, is to make it look like candid camera. I mean, he's just...
Well, here's the other thing we have to keep in mind. I mean, this guy is, and I don't mind to say it, but I'm not going to use some of the language because you'd have to bleep it, but
yeah.
This guy's crazy enough that later on in the week it was announced he took, I guess, five, I think it was officers or something like that. He basically used anti-aircraft guns to execute them.
That's brutal.
Yeah, and it was because they made him enraged. Now, this is a type of guy that, they'll use mines, they'll use this, they'll use nerve gas. But what he has done diplomatically has been a great faux pas, and he's trying to desperately consolidate his power inside of North Korea. Yep. And here's part of the reasoning. Obviously, there's a few countries that still allow him or his people to move around, and some of those are in Southeast Asia. So...
Well, apparently they had good relations with Malaysia until this event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, now there's going to be even more countries saying, I don't know if we should allow even any more people to come visit our country, from North Korea, because really we don't want to be the next assassination site and have to deal with decontaminating and shutting down our airport or whatever. And that's part of the whole point. I'm sure the government that had the assassination is probably sitting there fuming, going, great, now we're a target for any time that he wants to go strike out at his family. It was reported in the press also, minor side note, that this half-brother had contacted North Korea the year before and said, please, please, don't kill myself or my family. So they knew he had been planning to eventually off him. Mm. He'd offed his aunt, he offed his uncle. This is, Caligula unbound, only with weapons of mass destruction now, mind you.
Now, is this the typical use of VX nerve agent? I mean, attacking a single person?
No. This was very unusual, but it was because it is such a deadly chemical that a lot of countries are also quite concerned. This is something that if you really wanted to knock out an invading force, or if you want to depopulate a city, some of these things were used by such brutal dictators as Saddam Hussein. He used it against the Kurds in combination with mustard gas agents. It was reported that he had actually written the entry or the prologue to a medical journal that talked about combining the two, blister agents and nerve agents, to guarantee not only high casualty rates, but the survivors would have chromosomal damage. I don't make this up. This is as nuts as you can get. But there are some people that wanted to say, look, if I want to exterminate a people, I want to commit genocide, let me use the best weapons for genocide. Now, the other thing is, if you're going to use this in a battlefield situation, you're going to be using it for what is called an area denial. In other words, you're going to contaminate the area. You're going to expose anybody that's there as a combatant. And because you have only just a tiny amount that's necessary to effectively kill your combatant, you can disperse it at a great amount so you get bigger bang for your buck for the area that you're going to cover with the smallest amount of this chemical. And the chemical, to a degree, will linger for a while in certain conditions of the environment, so you're guaranteed to make it inaccessible for your enemy to go through that area without having subsequent effects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah.
All right. Now, speaking of North Korea and WMDs, based on any credible information that you have, what else is in their arsenal, chemical and biological?
Oh, chemicals, they basically, it's very sad and it's very interesting at the same time. They've put they're using a lot of the stuff that was in the sense of the economic and industrial might of what you saw with the old Soviet Union, which put a lot into defense, put a lot into the industrialization, but not for the comfort of the people. You call it making pesticides, but it's really nerve agents. So they've got a host of VX and some of the older strains of Soman and Sarin, etc. They also have a lot of mustard gas, as well as anti-riot agents and cyanide. There is rumor that they have up to about 4,000 tons of adamsite. Now, let me explain adamsite. It's not that commonly known, but it is an arsenic compound. It was best known as what they would call a mask breaker. Now, here's the deal. You expose the people to this. They've got masks on, but they suddenly get the urge because it's absorbed by the skin and acts on the brain and the gastrointestinal system. You want to immediately vomit. That's why they rip off their masks. Now, if you did a combined attack with adamsite and nerve agents, adamsite coming in first, a lot of people wouldn't be able to get the masks and the entire MOP4 uniforms on completely in time. Probably would have some skin absorption and then may want to vomit. But then when you go in with the second wave of gases like VX or something, the first thing you're going to do after you've vomited is take a deep breath in. Normal physiological response. Mm-hmm. Hope I'm not grossing out your listeners, but this is a normal response. And so what happens is you take it in and you're going to get a dose of the gas, even though most of you is still protected, but that's it. Party's over. You've killed the best protected soldiers. Now, that's the chemical. The biological, there are various speculations. One of them is pretty much anthrax. There is rumors for smallpox, several of the viruses, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's plague, and partly because of the fact that what they have done is that when the Soviet Union was breaking down, North Korea brought in a lot of the Soviet bioweapons engineers. I mean, you know, they were sitting there saying, look, I can't even make a month's pay to feed my family. Come on down. We'll give you $3,000 a month. Sure. Well, or $300 a month. Well, that beats nothing. And so they go and they take their talents and skills and they help engineer various pathogens. Some of them may have snuck some samples out, and then you rebuild up the stocks. Now, the evidence for anthrax is very clear now because there was a lot of technology that North Korea was forbidden to get. This included what they would call drying machines and machines to control how you separate out cells from cell culture and things like that. Surprise, surprise. North Korea asked an international agricultural agency, said, we want to grow Bacillus thuringiensis, which for those of you that know BT, that's a common pathogen that they use to control pests in various crops. Well, the very same equipment that you use to grow BT can be sterilized very quickly within a matter of a day and then reconfigured to grow Bacillus anthracis. Anthrax.
Right.
And so they had the great leader recently shown with drying equipment and all this other equipment that they had purchased in cooperation with this agricultural unit, and they had gotten the equipment from China. So they have the centrifuges and everything else. Now, some people might argue and say, yeah, but this is only to set up a pilot plant. It doesn't take them long to copy the designs. They're very good at reverse engineering. You know, we complain and go bananas about ballistic missiles that they have, et cetera. Where do you think they got them from, guys? They copied everybody else's designs and then just made some minor improvements. You know, they copied the Chinese and the Russians and everybody else. They cooperated with...
Excuse me, Dr. Roberge.
I'm sorry.
Can you finish up that thought in about 30 seconds? I'm
a lot of
coming up against a break.
Technology and imported. They've been found to be now making chemical warfare suits, and it was supposed to go to Syria.
All right, we're getting ready for a break. I appreciate it. I've been talking to Dr. Lawrence Roberge about what's going on with North Korea and their weapons of mass destruction. And I encourage you to check out the website. It's outbreaknewstoday.com, outbreaknewstoday.com. Today, the website is peppered with stories about flu, the new flu shot, and mumps outbreaks here and there. All right, I'll see you after the break. We'll talk more about North Korea.
Outbreak News This Week, your source for all the news about worms and germs. Here's your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Welcome back to the show. In the first half, we were talking about North Korea, the issue that happened in Malaysia, VX nerve agent, and their weapons of mass destruction. And I'm joined by Roberge PhD. He's a professor at Laboure College in Massachusetts, and he's a biodefense and bioterrorism researcher. And Dr. Roberge, I cut you off in the first half. Can you want to continue your thought?
Well, no problem. Basically, what I was trying to say was this. In North Korea, they basically have worked with other rogue nations, and what they don't know, they trade off with other nations. So they have been able to proliferate and spread information, technology, tools for the development of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, biological, chemical, etc., and to the point where they're making it part of their industries. For example, relatively recently, the Greek government caught a ship. It was chartered from North Korea, and it was going to Syria. And it was loaded with, made in North Korea, chemical warfare masks and uniforms for the Syrian soldiers. Okay? Remember that the Syrians have dropped barrel bombs, some containing chemicals, some containing chlorine, etc. Even though they had gotten rid of a lot of their more nastier chemicals, they still held some of that stuff, and they were still using them in the format of barrel bombs, basically dropping it from a helicopter, and it explodes and disperses the agent and kills the civilians as well as the enemy forces. Now, as a result, North Korea is got a lot of tools and has moved up quite rapidly. They've copied designs from the Chinese and the Russian on missiles. They have copied capabilities. They've gotten technical help from old Soviet Union chemical warfare specialists and biological weapons specialists. So it's around. Their tools of weapons of mass destruction are around.
Now, I saw an AP report today that the U.S. and South Korea are doing on maneuvers. They're doing their exercises, and North Korea made a pretty threatening statement that you get too close, we got the missiles from hell coming at you, more or less. And Kim's a pretty scary guy. What are your thoughts on someone like him actually using his arsenal on, say, South Korea?
Well, I think that he's probably of the past of the three dictators of North Korea. He is probably the most volatile and could lead to one of the most serious crises, if not serious pogroms on the Korean Peninsula. And I'll explain that. This is an individual that has removed his opposition by just killing them. This is an individual who, although they make bellicose statements every time they don't like something that would be obviously to their advantage, they've also been chafing from their previous puppet masters of the Chinese. The Chinese recently have said, okay, we're not shipping you, we're not trading with you for coal, which is a major fuel for them for a year. Well, fine. But meanwhile, the Chinese don't want this to get any more out of control because they know one of the big problems they would have is if the government collapsed, if a war broke out, they would have probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of refugees streaming across their northern border, and that would be pretty nasty. But on top of that, you have to realize how serious these people in North Korea are. They have tunnels that have been dug below and underneath the demilitarized zone. I had the good fortune of talking to somebody who works with robotics, and they had sent robots down. And some of these tunnels go right underneath the city of Seoul, 12 miles away. They've been digging. Oh. Okay? Now, you have to think about this, though. Some of those tunnels are not wide. It's not like they would have, 10 men wide, marching all the way down through these tunnels. They've got other things they want to throw at them. We've got the 32nd Battalion there for the United States Army, which is primarily CBN, which is chemical, biological, and nuclear. You've got a lot of military bases there. We're putting up anti-ballistic missile systems. Chinese are not happy about that. But that doesn't matter, because this one nut basically torments, destroys his people, puts them into prison camps. It would not matter to him, even if, as some generals have said, don't worry about it. The first day they'll throw stuff. The second day there won't be any more of North Korea. It'll be vaporized. Yeah, but then you deal with a lot of other problems. One of them is, of course, a radioactive Korean Peninsula. Another possibility is if they, the North Koreans, launch a biological attack with agents that we have not seen for a long time. And I mentioned it earlier, smallpox. If you unleash smallpox, you're releasing it, in essence, to the entire world. How do you isolate an entire peninsula? Or better yet, how about if some of the casualties and some of the refugees start streaming north to China? And as I had said, I would probably go to the ambassador of China and say, are you really serious that you're not going to touch or do anything? Are you prepared for possibly smallpox being reintroduced back into your country? And if you are, do you have 1 billion doses of smallpox vaccine ready to distribute? Because that's what you're going to face. And how would the rest of the Western world deal with contaminated, basically Korean Peninsula? Remember, the South is tremendously active in trade and very, very, I think they're one of the 6 largest economies in the world. And you've got people that would probably be jumping on planes and getting out. But in the midst of biological, chemical warfare, everything else, not to mention missiles, not to mention some of these missiles might not be fired at South Korea, but at the support systems for the South Korean military, such as the American bases all the way out to Guam, into Japan, etc. This gets really hairy, and we don't know the full extent of this. And, of course, he's got nuclear weapons. Yeah. One of the big scenarios I keep seeing showing up on the Internet is, what if he launches one and it contains a warhead, and it's popped above the United States to create an electromagnetic pulse, and it does actually damage our electrical grid. And that is a serious issue. So we're talking about all sorts of different avenues of weapons of mass destruction with somebody who's really more infantile in their means of dealing with problems as a national leader. This leader of North Korea is nothing much more than a grade A nut, a spoiled child who now has at his fingertips all sorts of weapons, and nobody inside the government wants to really oppose him because they might be the next one to get the anti-aircraft guns blazing away at them for execution.
I want to follow up on the smallpox.
Okay.
Now, how sure are you of this? And clearly, if you know it, then the U.S. government must know. So there's got to be a grave concern about that.
I think there is grave concern, but I'll put it this way. If you were to ask me under oath, do I have 100% certainty? I've seen mention of it on news, bits and pieces. Some information leaks out through basically defectors. Some information has leaked out that they've used basically handicapped kids and adults and political prisoners for test cases for their weapons. Because it is such a sealed-off nation, it is, I will say this, hard to get absolute proof. They have signed the bioweapons treaty. Doesn't mean anything. It's ink on paper for them. They've never signed the chemical weapons treaty, and I don't think they ever would, because they would have to get rid of a lot of stuff. And this guy knows he's got more power by just having speculation and fear than some of his predecessors. And he also knows, in the meantime, he can cheat. He can get around things. And the fact is that, when you have former Soviet bioweaponeers coming in, getting jobs where they could at least eat, in North Korea, when the Soviet Union fell, I wouldn't be surprised that some of the vials of various strains, including the Aralas strain, which has 100% fatality for a strain of smallpox. That was a version that was weaponized by the Soviet Union. I wouldn't be surprised if it got it in there.
Okay, but I just want to make sure it's clear. This is speculation on your part?
I've seen, like I said, a couple of vague references, but 100% nobody has that,
right?
Except perhaps the weaponeers that are actually in North Korea. So I'll clarify that for you.
Okay, good. All right.
No, that's good.
All right, let's switch gears to the Munich Security Conference that occurred a couple weeks ago in Germany, and Bill Gates, in a panel discussion entitled "Health Security: Small Bugs, Big Bombs," said the following, which caught a lot of media attention. I'm going to go ahead and read a portion of it to you.
Go ahead.
And get your comment. Quote, we also face a new threat that the next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen of a terrorist intent on using genetic engineering to create a synthetic version of the smallpox virus or a contagious and highly deadly strain of the flu. The point is, we ignore the strong link between health security and international security at our peril, whether it occurs by the quirk of nature or at the hand of a terrorist. Epidemiologists show through their models that a respiratory spread pathogen would kill more than 30 million people in less than a year, and there is a reasonable probability of that taking place in years ahead. Close quote. I'd like to get your thoughts on what Mr. Gates had to say. Hyperbole, or is Gates onto something?
Oh, he's onto something, but he had not only said it at the Munich, he had hinted at it or discussed a little bit of it at the Davos conference, the World Economic Forum, in January as well. So I think he's on to something that he's trying to articulate. And I think part of this is because he's seen what Ebola has done. He's seen with his foundation what they're trying to fight against with some things like malaria, et cetera. But the problem today is, yes, we do have a lot more availability. And Robert, think about this. When you were doing some of your, undergraduate or graduate work in microbiology, et cetera, the tools were a lot harder and more expensive. And now we've got guys who have been able to take, with do-it-yourself technology, et cetera. I have been really surprised to see how people have been able to make polymerase chain reaction thermocyclers and real simple gel electrophoresis and a bunch of other tools and techniques. My gosh, Manu Prakash came up with this less than $10, made out of paper, microscope that has incredible capability. It's called Foldscope. Now, why I'm saying all these crazy things is because when you take do-it-yourself biology, and I've met some people who have actually been do-it-yourself biologists, and you put them with also the synthetic biologists who are sitting there saying, if I take this piece of DNA and this piece of DNA, this one, I can make a new functioning organism. It's potentially possible, yeah. And what's potentially scarier is you could have a criminal element do this. You could have a rogue government do this. You could have just the lone wolf who's really nuts and probably has the moral equivalent of Klebold and Harris that did the Columbine massacre and would have no compunction to hurting individuals. We have whole terrorist groups that they find nothing wrong with them dying for their cause, even if it means killing all these other people. We're in a world that's got a lot of challenges. That's the bottom line. Now, the big question is, okay, Bill, now that you've said this, who's going to start ponying up the real funds that are necessary? Not just a matter of saying, okay, we're going to educate you on this, but having the vaccine researchers, the quick biology analysis facilities. And also there's one thing I've been finding, the capability to handle the surge of the casualties after a bioweapon has been dispersed and the people that are going to be sick. One of the things I've found by talking with some people out at Harvard was, yes, you have these great tools and all this other stuff, but when you talk about a surge of 10,000 or 30,000, we're not talking 500,000, we're not talking 1 million or 2 million or 20 million. Just even 10,000, that can overwhelm everything.
Yeah.
And then everything falls to pieces, and people start acting very, very brutally. So our exercises are, whether they're tabletop or we're moving troops through here and we're moving public health through there, and we're, using all their tools and helicopters and decontamination units, we got to go through this a lot more, because everybody that I've talked with says, yeah, we might be able to isolate, but we're having a difficulty in trying to figure out how we can deal with the tsunami of the dead, the sick, and the scared. How do we also maintain function, day-to-day function, continuity of government? How do we maintain just-in-time deliveries of goods and services when everything is suddenly crazy? And you can see a scenario of this if you go back and learn and look at what society did during the 1918 flu epidemic. I mean, one town actually sealed itself off. Do you know what was the only flaw in their entire plan?
What's that?
They received the mail. The mailman came into town. He was the one that brought the virus in, and then everybody got sick. No joke. That actually happened in the West, the Western states. And I was fascinated with reading this, going, wow. Now, you got to remember something else. We don't always have this magical, almost like 24 or Star Trek. We can detect it in 10 minutes or less. It takes time. You may have to have not only a case, but a bunch of cases before you come to any idea. And I bring this up, for example, there's a book called The Fourth Horseman. And really what it is, it's not about disaster or anything, but it was the actual first bioweapons attack in the United States by German saboteurs. And Anton Dilgar was the one who did this. He was a doctor. He was born in the United States, but he had German ancestry. So when World War I started, he had been out volunteering, helping the German government, then came back. And the German government was like, no, we don't want to use this against humans. We have no problem using it against animals. And of course, in a lot of the war, they were still using horses and mules to carry equipment to the battlefields, whether it was Mesopotamia or the Central European battlefields. You with me so far?
Yep.
Because there's one more point. They didn't really understand all of this till almost 10 to 15 years after the war. And they never caught Anton Dilgar. They had outbreaks. They couldn't figure out what it started. They thought it was something that was normal. They would have their agents. He was cultivating in Chevy Chase, Maryland, anthrax and glanders. They never made any of the connections that a bioweapon was being used or anything else till years later, and they had investigations and everything else like this going into the late 20s. And they had some people testify. But by that time, Dilgar was gone. There was speculation he was in Mexico or he was there, he was here, he was there. But they never got him. And it was only after the fact that some of the spies who were eventually caught, some of the saboteurs who were caught, decades later were able to start talking about it.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Roberge, for this absolutely bone-chilling segment.
Sorry.
And no, I'm just joking. And again, thank you.
Spring's coming if you want a happy note.
Yeah, right. Wow, that's a lot to digest there. Thank you again, Dr. Lawrence Roberge, for your time and expertise, sir. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was a great pleasure.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, like I said earlier, that the website, outbreaknewstoday.com, we've got mump stories peppered all over the place, and we're seeing them in Washington State, in the different universities, Alabama, Penn State, hockey teams, the Minnesota Wild and the Vancouver Canucks, and Canada is getting hit pretty hard with mumps. we're seeing outbreaks in Manitoba and Toronto and Alberta. So, well, just recently, federal officials met to consider a third measles, mumps, and rubella dose. And for the next year, the CDC's Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices will be studying mumps. And they're going to be trying to answer some of these questions because we're seeing all these outbreaks. Some of the concern is why the narrow age group that we're seeing the mumps outbreaks in. Why is it in certain geographic areas and not in others? And, why is it mostly in vaccinated young adults getting mumps? And it's gotten so bad up in Canada that the chief public health officer on Wednesday issued a statement about mumps, and just to inform the public because Canada is getting hit pretty hard by it right now. Yeah, and I just wanted to share this with you. I mean, for those of you, this is off topic, but for those of you that know me, I'm something of a crusader for life. And I had this interesting exchange with a individual on social media. And this is something I don't usually do because I see all the stupid memes and I try to ignore them because I always get caught up in something really ridiculous. But there was a meme that was put out and it said, to kill a human, you're a murderer. Kill a dog, you are an animal abuser. Kill a pig, and you are a farmer. Well, I responded to that. Dumb me. and I just wrote, are you seriously trying to equate a farmer slaughtering a pig to the murder of a human being? And nothing happened for several hours. Then this person from some kind of vegan journal gets on there and writes to me, slaughter is the same as murder. It's the act of killing another living being. Human, pig, dog, we're all # earthlings and want to live. Why is it so hard to make that connection? That's what she writes to me. And I write back, because there is a difference. Why is that so hard to get? And it keeps on going back and forth. No, Robert, there really isn't. Why is that so hard? And this is just blows my mind. The Jewish people wanted to live, and there were many who were slaughtered by the hands of the Nazis. Animals want to live and are killed by humans. While the earthling has changed, doesn't that mean that they're not being deserved of the same basic life? The arrogance of man is what keeps him in the dark. And I responded, are you saying that humans are no more valuable than a dog or, say, a mouse? And she goes, then she writes back, I'm saying that every living earthling is equal, not the same, but equal. And says that ants provide a bigger service to Mother Nature than humans do. I'm like, okay, where's this thing going? So I posed the question to her. Is a man who kills his dog to feed his starving son no different morally than a man who kills his son to feed his dog? And she's like, why does killing have to be part of the equation? I say to her, I don't know. That's because what the meme was about. And this is what she writes to me. Killing doesn't have to be part of the equation. Animals kill as part of the balance with Mother Nature. Humans kill out of greed, and we stop being part of that balance. I see humans as parasites on the planet. For me personally, the dog has more value than the human life. However, I can't ask a person who has no respect for animals to have respect for other humans. So, yes, she thinks that a dog has more value than a human being. And it's been a scary show today, but I'm going to close on that. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Lawrence Roberge. I want to thank Ace Andrews, and I want to thank you for listening. And I will see you next week on Outbreak News This Week. Good night, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to Outbreak News This Week with Robert Herrmann. If you missed any part of today's program, you can listen to the podcast anytime on our website, outbreaknewstoday.com. Make sure to join us here next week for Outbreak News This Week with Robert Herrmann.